Welcome. My name is Corinne Waldow. I'm the Economic Development Director for the Boulder Chamber. And I want to thank you for joining this week's restaurant sector call. In coming weeks, we'll be actually combining some of the industries. So be on the lookout for the notice today so that you can be part of those webinars in the future. We want to keep these opportunities for you to get information, updated orders, to answer your questions and so forth. But we'll be combining restaurant with both hospitality and events in coming weeks. For this call today, I want to thank all of the other chambers and economic development agencies for making sure you're getting the information you need to safely reopen. It is very important that we all work together to make sure we're following these guidelines and requirements to increase consumer confidence in retail, restaurants, in our hotels. Seeing people following the requirements and keeping public health and the economy front and center will help us all in the end. So I appreciate you being on today's call and listening to the requirements, getting your questions answered. At this time, I'm going to hand it off to Lane Drager with Boulder County Public Health. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A throughout the program.
Thank you, Corinne, and thank you everybody for joining us for our weekly installment of what's happening with COVID and safer at home. So there was more orders that came out today. So we'll highlight, for the most part, the restaurant stayed very similar. There is kind of one key point that we'll make sure to highlight. Zach, if you would advance for me. So again, we're going to make sure that you're familiar with all the updates related to where things are at, really highlighting those resources we've been continuing to build and hone for the individual sectors, and then definitely have a lot of time for your questions and answers. So again, here's just a recap of where we've been with the various milestones today. Again, getting another update. Some sectors more significant changes than others, but again, we'll highlight the ones for your sector today. And just to continue to reiterate, this is still a long haul. We know that there's been changes coming out, certainly in the last few weeks and last few months, but we're not going to be out of some version of our need to do social distancing and take different precautions for a really long time. Our need for a vaccine and have that large immunity throughout our community is what's still driving the need for these various steps. We still hope that everything is successful and we continue to move forward, but again, we're in for a long haul of some version of safer at home. The other, again, reminders are the disease we're dealing with has not changed radically. We continue to learn more and more about it, but the fact that things are opening up is not because the disease is less serious. It's just that we are at a point where we've been managing it and feel that there are steps that can be taken to allow people to start having some semblance of their lives back, and certainly businesses to start recognizing some income. But our face covering order is still in effect. We still need people not to be out and about as if nothing is amiss still. Really want to drive people to those resources. The state will be updating as they continue to make their orders come out, but that's the big piece. I'm going to hand it over, I think, now to Zach, who is going to take it here for the restaurant specific guidance.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly webinar. So I just wanted to preface this conversation by saying that I did not get that amendment. So Lane, if you would at some point present on the key updates associated with the Fifth Amendment to Safer at Home.
Sure.
I just didn't have time or see the information.
Sure, I can highlight that. It's really one small change, but I think it's significant for those industries that were initially not included in the restaurant guidance. So it talked about what businesses needed to stay closed, which was bars, taverns, brew pubs, breweries, microbreweries, distilleries, all those kind of categories were not allowed to be operational. And now they can, if they are providing food and they have access to food from a licensed retail food establishment for on-premise consumption. So I think the model that we see most frequently is a tasting room, a brewery, something like that, that has a food truck in the parking lot for them to access food from a licensed business. So that model would allow those businesses to both continue operation. So again, it needs to be access to retail food, not just going out and buying some snacks for the patrons. So again, if there's more clarification, we can provide it. But again, a lot of those people that already had those models set up will now be able to resume operation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, let's talk about not only that information, but some information that I want you to be aware of. It seems that there's resources coming out from a lot of different angles. So today I wanted to focus on the stuff coming directly out of the state because it's changing weekly. So I'm going to switch over here to another PowerPoint. Can we all see that? Just give me 1 second here. My screen's getting in the way. There we go. Can everybody see that? Fantastic. Okay, so this is just another way to digest the information that is in Safer at Home, the Safer at Home guidelines for restaurants. So the next couple slides, we'll talk about the requirements. And then if you have any questions associated with these, we've gone over them last week and this week now. Please do put that in the Q&A portion of you know, the chat bar there. So the first thing is for reopening. If you're not there yet and you're looking at reopening, you need to be able to meet all these guidelines that are outlined here in Safer at Home for restaurants. First thing would be for your employees, and that's implementing symptom monitoring protocols. We've talked a lot about illness over the last couple weeks, and the real goal here is to prevent you from becoming a place where this disease is spread. So all these guidelines are set up to do that, and you want to start with your employees. So having that symptom monitoring system in place, as well as temperature checks, is going to set you up for success there. As you go down the list here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you'll see that there's pictures associated with them. So number 1, there's symptom monitoring protocol. You can see that they're doing temperature checks there in that first picture. The second thing that is been hotly debated over the last few weeks, but is in place, is that indoor dining room occupancy needs to be at 50% or less of your building code limit, or a maximum of 50 patrons, whichever comes first, whichever is fewer, okay? All employees must wear face coverings. That's been in place for some time now. Limiting parties of 8, or limiting parties to 8 or fewer. Deep cleaning and disinfecting of all shared surfaces between parties and each turnover. Highly recommended that you provide customers like a sign-in type situation where if there is an exposure, you can contact them. This is most often done through reservations or something of that nature. Outdoor dine-in service is obviously encouraged. We've talked a lot about that, and we've talked a lot about expanding our space into adjacent properties such as parking lots or walking malls. That is something that if you're in the city of Boulder, you can work with city of Boulder. Longmont, again, you'd be going with that local jurisdiction. That is not done at the health department, okay? Very important piece. We're not gonna hold you back in any regard there. And then if you do have a confirmed case among customers or employees, notifying us here at the health department to work with our epidemiology folks. And then again, I'll talk a little bit more about protocol as we go forward in these slides. But again, big thing here is 50% occupancy indoor dining capacity, right? Or 50 patrons, whichever comes first. Here's just a good picture that I like that came out of the state, and it just gives you a rundown of like what to expect in your restaurant. And you can see that a fully seated restaurant, you have folks that would be close together. Here you see that they're utilizing seating closed signs. At least that's what their graphic is attempting to show you. And they're also using signage at the front door that says "Do not enter if sick." And then the thermometer is for their employees. Okay, so reopening considerations. This is essentially a checklist that we also have at Boulder County that I will provide you in just a minute. But again, implementing symptom monitoring for your employees, limiting dine-in to 50% of that occupancy limit or 50 patrons. Patrons from different parties need to be at least 6 feet apart. And there should be no intermingling of parties. It's seated dining only. So you just want to prevent congregation and standing of any sort. Elevating intensity and increase the frequency of cleaning and sanitizing, especially between parties. That has to be done each time. Outdoor dining service, like I said, is encouraged, and we're asking that you expand it, but work with your local jurisdiction. No self-service stations or buffets. We've gotten a lot of questions about drink dispensers, ice dispensers, coffee, stations. All those types of things have to be monitored and distributed from your employees to customers. So there should be no self-service of any type, whether that be drink station or buffet. Employees must wear face coverings. Like I said, that's been around. Moving on, when we talk about monitoring employees, you would utilize that state symptom screening question document. Appoint an employee per shift to monitor your staff for adherence to these regulations. And that's not only patrons, but your employees as well. Staff who are currently sick or have symptoms should remain at home. And I'll talk more about that again in a little bit. If you have a confirmed case, then contact us. So it's a lot of the same thing here. If you're sick, don't come to work. If you have folks that you suspect may be sick, ask them to quarantine and self-isolate. Good personal hygiene. Appropriate hand washing. Every 30 minutes, your staff should be washing their hands. Also, when they enter and exit the facility. Requiring face coverings, not only for your staff, but anybody that enters your building, vendors, suppliers, things like that. They need to be following the same protocol that your staff is. Providing hand sanitizer at your check-in area and throughout the venue. And then requesting customers to wear face coverings when they're not eating or drinking. So if they're walking into the dining room, they're going to be passing by other patrons, and that's the time that masks should be worn. We're not asking that masks be worn when they're eating or drinking. We understand that's impossible, but all those entry and exit points where you're going to have folks coming into close proximity. And then, like I said, posting clear signs notifying the patrons and employees of hygiene and sanitation expectations, and that they should not enter if they are sick. Customer spacing, clearly marking floors to delineate 6-foot spacing. This would include inside and outside of your building, wherever your line may form. So it could be your restrooms, it could be the front counter, it could be outside while waiting for a table. I think we've hammered home that the 50% occupancy is in place, or the 50 patrons. Again, 8 people or fewer at each party. And then making accommodations for individuals that are unable to adhere to these requirements. So really the requirement here, or the recommendation, is that if they can't adhere to these things, offering things that like takeout and curbside. Again, preventing congregations. So no communal seating. We've had a lot of questions surrounding businesses that may have like these long tables those are not gonna work if you're sitting folks from different parties at the same table or within 6 feet of one another. Okay. The sign-in is just a piece to do contact tracing if there is an exposure. And technology is your best friend in this situation. So if you can have text systems in place to notify folks when their table's ready, they can stay in their car or stay outdoors. Technology would also help you for cashless options. You want to prevent any kind of person-to-person contact, and so anything that you can do in that way. So again, it's cashless options. It would be menus, would be online, something like that. And then another big one that we've had a lot of questions on is the bar. So if you have a bar within your retail food establishment and you have a bartender there, then so they're prepping drinks and food, right? So they're cutting lemons, limes, garnishes, things like that. Then you cannot seat folks at the bar. However, if you are using it for dine-in service only, so the drinks and the food are being prepared elsewhere, in the kitchen preferably, then you may sit people at your bar. So that is where we're at right now. We think that's going to change and it's going to loosen, but it's not in this phase. In this phase, if you have a bar, then you need to eliminate bar service from that space. So no drinks, no food being prepared in that space. And then you can utilize it like seating that for the rest of the restaurant. Social distancing parties not sitting together, or different parties sitting together. Outdoor seating, we've talked about it, sidewalks, parking lots, anything, adjacent properties. Get creative here, get creative. The guidance is allowing for that, and the governor has recommended it. Let's see. Outdoor seating is really the same as indoor seating as far as distancing goes. You're still looking at 6 feet. You're still looking at masking in and out of those spaces. And again, 8 or fewer in a party. Limiting contact, we've talked about that. I think we've beaten that one to the ground. And modifying the menu to create additional space, that's a good one. So if you have an extensive menu, you might want to look at paring that down to the essentials so that you don't have too many folks in your kitchen space trying to create these menu items. We want to not only promote social distancing for the patrons, but also your kitchen staff, and that will go a long way in preventing from too many people from being in a small space. Workflows, shift cohorting, shift changes, all those types of things. We want you to utilize social distancing techniques. So shift cohorting would be the same people work with the same people every day, right? So if you do have an illness with shift A, it's not going to possibly affect shift B. And staggering of shifts and shift changes, you want to prevent folks from coming into contact with one another during those times. So work with that. And then cleaning frequency, a lot of questions on what should you use to clean and sanitize your restaurant or disinfect. My best advice for you is to look at CDC guidance. There's some great guidance as far as outbreaks go and what you should use in those situations, but also just reading the label. The label is always the law. If it's effective for COVID-19, it should be on the label. And there's a lot of guidance that's out there on that front. So look for that. I think the best place to find that is CDC's website. So let's go back to our original presentation here. That was all state guidance. Oh, you know what? There is one other piece that I want to show you online. So this is the state's website here. This is the guidance. This is from the state that's come out and that we've broken down in this presentation and in our checklist. So you can see They break it down into employees, customers, and workspaces. This is for pickup only. Again, I won't go over this again. It's all the same information. It's just in a different form, okay? Here's some good graphics that I wanted to share with folks. Just gives you an idea of what you'd be looking at for ideally separating and doing social distancing. This would be a counter service type facility. You can see that in the entrance, outside the building, there should be like some clearly marked, delineated 6-foot distances between parties. They come in one way and the flow goes out one way. So it's one-way traffic. It's not folks from different parties kind of passing one another more than necessary. You can also see in this graphic that single occupancy restrooms or anything, you could have more than single occupancy restrooms, but they have to be at least 6 feet apart. So it might mean that you are reducing the number of restrooms or number of urinals or toilets. This is an example of a large venue utilizing several different techniques, such as the outdoor seating, indoor seating, and then they have pickup, curbside to go on the upper portion of the graphic. So these are just some good tools that you can kind of use to get an idea of how to do a setup if you're curious of, how am I going to go about this? These are some good graphics that I think will assist you. And then this shows how a converted space like a parking lot would work. Again, one-way traffic. You have entrance and an exit, and not a situation where people are passing by one another constantly. All right, back to our presentation. The Boulder County Safer at Home checklist. We're going to be putting this on our website today. It's going to look like this. Again, same information that you saw from the state, but look for this as your #1 resource for reopening. It's something that I would highly recommend that you would post to show that that you are meeting the requirements of Safer at Home. And I think it's going to only be a confidence builder for anybody that comes into your facility. It doesn't need to be submitted to us in any way, but if we have complaints and we have inspectors coming out to your facility about specific questions, you can use that to show us how you're meeting the requirements. So it's broken down here into operations requirements. Again, same information, but it's a clickable document that you can go through to make sure that you're ready for this step of reopening. Again, for employees and then for customers. And then, like we have had since the beginning, pickup. Okay, so that will be on our website this afternoon, and Corinne will have that information to send out after this presentation. So should you reopen? I found this is a great document provided by the CDC, just a decision tree. I've shown you the checklist. I've shown you the Safer at Home order with all the requirements. If you are meeting those and you feel like you're ready to open, then go through this decision tree and go ahead and jump in the water. But if you're not, then meet those safeguards. And I think it's a fairly easy document to use, but just you need to evaluate that before you open your doors. Don't just jump in with no idea if you're there yet. We've had a lot of complaints since May 27th that folks are not adhering to these requirements. And I really just want to emphasize that it's not only to your benefit to be following these requirements, but it's also for our economy, right? Customer confidence is not going to be there if you're not following these. And you're going to lose business, in my opinion, if you're not showing the appropriate amount of precaution. So just remember that we're all in this together, and there are going to be loosening of these requirements if we continue to move in the right direction. So just an emphasis for all business owners out there, please, 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 these are not recommendations, these are requirements, okay? So now I just wanted to jump into some things that have come up over the last few weeks. A big question that we receive is, what if I have a positive employee? What do I do? In most cases, you do not have to shut down your workplace or facility. But if it has been less than 7 days since that sick employee has been in your facility and they were in there for prolonged periods of time, then you may want, no, you're not may, but you want to wait 24 hours before cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting that space, because there could still be respiratory droplets in that space. If that's not feasible, wait as long as possible. But during that waiting period, open doors and windows to increase circulation. And then the next piece is, if it's been more than 7 days, which is the more common situation, is that there's a lag time between the symptoms and the actual diagnosis. So if it's been more than 7 days since that sick employee used the facility, you still want to do additional sanitizing, disinfecting, but it's not necessary, because this is stuff that you should be doing every day. You should be cleaning and disinfecting those high touch surfaces. And when we're following the rules and regs of any retail food establishment, you're cleaning and sanitizing all the time. So follow CDC cleaning and disinfecting recommendations that you can find. We'll send out the link. That goes into our next thing. Outbreaks. An outbreak is defined as 2 or more employees with confirmed or suspected COVID-19 within a 14-day period. So if this happens, come to us, okay? There's an outbreak report form here. I've linked it that you should fill out, and then contact us immediately. And we'll help you determine what actions are necessary from there. The next thing, bars. Just want to emphasize, they are still not open, with the caveat that Lane did add, which if they can partner with another retail food operation, such as a food truck, then with my understanding what Lane has said, they could open. And then offering takeout and delivery and curbside is still encouraged, and we're there with that. Lane, anything to add to that piece? Or do you think we have it covered?
No, they would obviously need to adhere to all of those requirements that are spelled out here. So maximum of 50% occupancy or 50 people indoors. Can't have seating at the bar when the bar is being used to serve drinks. So they would need to use other seating. They can expand for outdoor seating, again, maintaining all those distancing, and then again, all the other protocols. So
okay,
as long as they're adhering to all those requirements, and then again, offering retail food options.
Great. So that's a really encouraging step that that we didn't have last week. The next thing, breweries, it kind of goes right into that, and it's forming those partnerships, providing the food by a licensed retail food establishment, such as a food truck. And as Lane said, light snacks and reheated commercially prepared foods, those don't meet the intent. So if you're going to Costco and you're buying frozen pizzas, that's not going to meet the requirements. So just keep that in mind. All right. What if a restaurant opens and it's not adhering to the requirements, as I was talking about earlier? It's really up to us as a community to let us know. I've gotten a lot of requests and complaints over the last week that folks, specifically in the city of Boulder, are not adhering to the requirements that we've gone over extensively today, but they're not providing me the actual restaurant names. So I can't follow up with them unless I have that information. So it's on all of us. And we just ask that you reach out for those types of things. Guidance and tools, we're going to continue, this evolves every week, but you can see on the right side, second bullet down, there's a safer at home checklist for grocery and food service that will be updated today. We'll send that out to you. We want you to use that resource. That's going to be your #1 resource for reopening. Again, I can't provide legal advice to you. There's a lot of specific questions that relate to restaurants, to your restaurant. I can only tell you what is in this order, and interpretation is really where you need to look at contacting an attorney. If you feel like you want a variance for something specific, then contact legal representation, because I am unable as a regulatory authority to interpret that for you. Where to go for information? Here's some good resources. Boulder County's website, COVID-19 business, state website, which we've used extensively today, covid19.colorado.gov. EnergizeColorado.com has great resources for you. Chamber of Commerce, thank you, Corinne, for having us once again. And then, so restaurant specific, look at Colorado Restaurant Association, National Restaurant Association, the CDC's website, and the FDA's website as well. Industry office hour sessions. It's not just food service that is navigating these times. We have several at this time. I think we're going to be paring them down in the weeks to come to more digestible, multi-sector sessions. But for this week, take a look. Here you go. 1 o'clock every week, you'll find me. And then contact us. Like I said, covidbiz@bouldercounty.org. Our call center, 720-776-0822. That's going to get to our complaint center, and we're going to be able to follow up with those specific businesses. All right, with that, I just want to open it up with any questions.
One comment on the call center, the hours have changed. It's 9 to 5 now. So, but
Thank
same
you.
number.
Well, thank you, Zach. Just a reminder that the resources he sent out, including the diagrams, a sign that you can use to say this table is closed, all of that will be sent out in an email following this. So we do have a few questions. Thank you to Lane for answering some of the questions that came in that were very specific. One question is that restaurants that have bars that pour wine and beer only, can they have people sitting at the bar?
My interpretation is that it would be a no. And that would be because there's not the possibility of 6 feet of distance between your bartender or the folks that are pouring and those open drinks and the customers. So that's where all this comes from. And we have been seeking clarification from the state on, well, what if it's a 400-foot bar and you're seating people at one end and the bartender is pouring these drinks at the very other end. But the answer for right now in this phase, that's as of today, is that would not be allowed.
We've also heard that, you're supposed to wear your mask when you're not dining or eating or drinking, but when you're at the bar and you're eating and drinking, you're going to be taking your mask off as a patron, and therefore, if you're talking, the droplets, it might expose the bartender and the people behind the bar. All right, so we've answered that one. So, Lane, I know we sent out guidance last week about the clarification on the indoor-outdoor. So could you maybe repeat the guidance on indoors, that is the 50 or 50%, whichever is lower, and what the outdoor guidance is?
Sure. As Zach mentioned, and I think at the last meeting, we hadn't heard from the state, was there any capacity limit for outdoor seating? And so we did get that answer, but it was after the webinar last week. So the outdoor seating does not count against that 50% capacity. There is no specific limit on outdoor other than the limit of spacing. So if you are able to expand your outdoor seating capacity, as long as you're spacing the dining parties so that they're at least 6 feet apart and not going to have that interaction, then you can expand your seating to whatever you can beyond the 50. So the 50 is just for indoors. And again, that's the lesser of 50 people or 50% occupancy, maintaining all that spacing. So again, you may not be able to still get to 50 with certain spaces. So,
so a lot of our municipalities are allowing restaurants to expand into parking spaces, right of ways, sidewalks, and so forth. and they're thinking about, okay, I need to follow these guidelines for my space. But what if you have a restaurant next to another restaurant? How do they need to make sure that there's spacing between those two outdoor sections too?
They do. I think the municipalities are also requiring some type of perimeter around your added outdoor space, whether that's fencing or planters or things like that, so that it's clearly delineated where your space ends. But there would be that same requirement for us that tables from adjoining restaurants need to be set up so that the patrons are at least 6 feet apart.
And any questions about, the keeping of equipment outside or the licensing, that needs to go to your municipality, because that's not governed by the public health department.
Right. And as Zach mentioned, all those approvals are happening through the respective municipalities. There is no public health approval. We've talked to Longmont. I know they've updated their website. So they previously had talked about needing health department approval. There is no health department approval needed. It's called for and allowed right here in the orders. The one exception would be there is no allowance to expand your outdoor cooking. So you can't add grills and other outdoor bars and things like that. So you need it to be exclusively adding seating. So you cannot expand the actual kitchen or any of that functionality outdoors.
Okay.
Also like to add to that, just because there's outdoor seating doesn't mean it's a free-for-all with animals. We want to adhere to the same requirements we've always had for outdoor seating, which is that unless it's a service animal, it is not allowed, okay? Service animals only. And
the one caveat to that is there is a state variance if you're adhering to all the requirements of the state variance to allow dogs on patios. So again, but that's a very prescriptive set of variance requirements. So you need to make sure you're adhering to all that.
And while the extension out onto those right-of-way areas is a municipality, they still need to follow the public health order. So I've seen pictures of a bunch of people dining out in these areas without masks on, and they're not eating at the time. They still need to wear masks in those outdoor areas when they're not eating or drinking. They still need to be social distance. They can't convene at another table and talk to them. Those still need to be adhered to, correct?
Correct.
Okay. There's a question about the temperature checks, and this has come up a lot on the other industry calls because this has been in those checklists for a while. But how do we do temperature checks while maintaining privacy? Apparently, some staff are upset about being having their temperatures checked.
I'm not sure privacy if they're worrying about that other people know that what their temperatures might be. I mean, again, that would be up to the businesses of figuring out where they're going to do that, but it isn't an invasive procedure, so it's typically just a forehead temperature check. So
and so we can go into the HIPAA piece, which Zach has talked about, not this Zach, a different Zach, has talked about on previous calls, and it's one of the documents that we do send out. Restaurants don't fall under HIPAA, and the guidelines are asking for, like, you can designate an individual or just a COVID coordinator to receive all the temperatures for a shift so that it's not public information. Those types of things have been practiced by offices and personal services and some of those. Do you have any other additional pieces on that?
I wouldn't necessarily say that restaurants don't fall under HIPAA. I think it's a matter of, is this procedure something that's disclosing health information, which I would say that the temperature checks themselves are not. How those logs are kept, so that they're not disclosed and shared publicly, that would be more the HIPAA piece. But doing this temperature check doesn't in and of itself violate any HIPAA issues.
And we, one of the documents that we linked to, and it's been in there the last couple of weeks, is the EEOC guidelines for maintaining privacy of employees. It's a long document, but it has an answer to a lot of these questions, and it's something you can also provide to your employees as a resource as well. So I'll continue to send that out in this week's stuff. All right, so Lane, you answered a question about ice machines. You kind of you wrote the answer, but we've gotten a lot of questions about ice machines. What are the recommendations for ice machines? Either you or Zach, the scooper, things like that.
Right. So again, the code doesn't specifically say that they can't store that in the ice as long as the handle is not in contact with the ice. But otherwise, they would need to store it in some place that's clean and free from contamination. So, so that, that idea that they need to leave it somewhere else, that's not what the food code says. It does allow for the handles to stay in the food itself as long as, or the scoop to stay in that ice as long as the handle is not in contact with the ice. Zach, any other pieces around that?
Yeah, I think having it in the ice is not like recommended by me, as it would often fall down in the ice. The clean, dry surface though, but yeah, as Lane said, in the food code, it says as long as that piece that you manipulate, which would be the handle, is not in the ice, there's no concern there as far as food code goes. Best practices would just be like a clean, dry surface, or like a bin that you would have the ice scoop stored in, a clean bin, not on top of the ice machine that stays there forever, collecting dust. But yeah.
And the employees need to be wearing facial coverings at all times. So again, I wasn't sure the concern of how the scoops were getting contaminated, but again, if there's any visible contamination on a scoop, it needs to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized. So.
Okay. So one company has had an employee ask about face shields, both in addition as well as in the place of masks. Can you please provide guidance on face shields?
Yeah, so typically face shields are protection for the wearer for some specific hazard, like you're cutting into something, you're worried about something flying into the person's eyes or mucous membranes. So that's what a face shield does. It protects the wearer from a hazard. It doesn't protect other people from the wearer. So the face shield isn't designed, and most of them, to knock down the droplets for the wearer, to protect then everybody around the wearer. So it's a different type of protection, and it's not the same as a respirator or a facial covering.
Okay.
So if they want to wear them in addition to a mask, because there's other hazards they're worried about, typically face shields are protecting the eyes and mucous membranes, they certainly can do that. It's not required unless there was an OSHA requirement for the business, like if they're sawing or cutting into something and they need a face shield. But again, it's not part of the requirements for our mask order or part of the requirements for the Safer at Home order. And it would not be able to be used in lieu of a facial covering or respirator.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, I've seen that kind of information coming out of other counties across the nation. And yeah, it would just be in addition to, and it is to protect that that server or employee from those droplets or any type of contamination from the customer. So in addition, not in lieu of. I think that's the key point.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask the next question. Is there any additional guidance on hosting live performances, indoor and outdoor?
No, it just would, again, it eats into your square footage. So you're going to still need the same requirements of maintaining 6-foot social distancing. If you had a musician set up either indoor or outdoors, that you need to have all the seating at least 6 feet away. You also cannot set up dance floors or anything that would allow congregation. So there's no prohibition on it. You just have to account for all your spacing requirements. And so obviously it'll further reduce your seating capacity.
How about pool tables, shuffleboard tables, any of those types of common use products within a bar or restaurant?
Under this phase, you would need to close all types of arcade games, pool tables, any type of board games, and that is specifically called out in the order. It's just important that everyone knows. I gave you some highlights today, but that's why it's important to look at the checklist and look at the state orders. We just don't have time to go through every single bullet point that's in that order as we did last week. So yes, that is specifically called out in the order that all arcade, pool tables, shuffleboard, board games should be closed at this time.
And then the last question, there's two questions. So one of the questions was about that variance for dogs on outdoor patios. If Elaine, you could send me the resource that I can send out to the group as far as where that's covered, we'll take care of it there. Is there any additional guidance in helping keep staff safe, like better masks, things they can be working on? You know, we're talking a lot about customer safety, but there is some trepidation from staff in coming back and interacting with the public. Should they change clothes after work? What are some other guidance that could make it extra safe, or, you know, add extra precautions for staff that's kind of a little worried about coming back?
Yeah, I think the guidelines that are put forth really do address those risks if the businesses are adhering to them, making sure. The biggest risk for, I think, employees is probably fellow employees. So really that employee screening and social distancing and wearing masks, washing hands frequently, all those are the big risk factors. They're not going to have a lot of customer interactions. Again, their clothes being a risk factor, you know, certainly they may want to change their clothes anyway when they get home from a shift after being in the restaurant, especially back in the kitchen. But that's not really your big risk for exposure. It's that close personal interaction with others. So again, that should be minimized already if you're a server or waiter, waitress, that kind of thing, so that you're not having a lot of close interactions with customers.
And, you know, as you mentioned, Zach, there were complaints about, you know, staff not wearing masks or social distancing not being followed. And that also affects not just your customers, but your other fellow employees as well. So following the standards as they're set out. In addition, we've talked a lot about on other webinars, transparency with both your customers and your staff. These are what we're supposed to follow. This is the checklist, and that's why that checklist is available for you to also provide for staff to see. These are the safety precautions being taken and brought down and required by the state.
Yeah, I think with the facial coverings, so the employers that you know, they need to be providing that. So if they're doing reusable ones, that they have enough supply that if people need extra ones during their work shift, that they have those accessible. If they're using disposable, they certainly have enough. So as they become, you know, wet, sweated, whatever it might be, that there's adequate supply for them to not trying to struggle through an entire shift with a mask that's now, you know, soggy and difficult to wear.
Okay. One last question, and then I think we're on time. And again, we will be sending out an email with a lot of these resources, especially the ones that Zach showed today that we haven't sent out in the past. There is a question about whether when taking off a mask to eat, a customer is putting a server at risk. You know, full service is allowed, but how are we putting servers at risk, and how can you reduce that?
Yeah, when people aren't wearing a mask, that now we don't have that protective piece. So to me, it would be a matter of all the patrons wearing their masks. The food is brought to the table. Once the server then leaves, people could take off their masks. So not doing it until the server is able to leave. So, and then, you know, as they're checking back in with the table, they maintain 6 feet of distance to check in with the table, so that, again, the servers can minimize their exposure risks.
So since they're not delivering the food and they're just checking in, they can maintain that space, keep their mask on, and talk to the tables.
Yeah, and they may want to think creatively about how they can deliver additional drinks and things like that to the table when people are actively eating and drinking and not wearing masks, so they can try to minimize that using carts or something like that. Maybe people have to get their own drink off the cart or something like that. I don't know. But again, that would definitely be a risk for servers as they're interacting with tables where people are not wearing a mask, and and talking and potentially expelling droplets. So.
Well, thank you, Zach. Thank you, Lane, for answering today's questions, providing this information, for giving us resources that we can continue to send out to our restaurants and other food service facilities. We will continue to take questions on COVID biz at Boulder County if you have more of them, and tune in each week. Next week's call will be at 1 o'clock. It will add hospitality and events because there's a little bit of crossover in some areas. You have that hospitality component to restaurants. So we're going to combine those at 1 o'clock next Tuesday. But in between, covidbiz@bouldercounty.org. If you can't find that and you have my email and you want to just send it to me, I'll send it off to covidbiz@bouldercounty.org. We want you to get your questions answered because we want you to safely reopen. Help us bring back public confidence in our retailers, our restaurants, our hospitality, and to help serve our economy and our health. So hope to see you all next week. Thank you to Boulder County Public Health, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.